Welcome everyone. Wojciech Sirek again, and of course Jan Kuban is here as well. We are journalists from namzalezy.pl, a Polish YouTube channel focused on world, economy and business. Today we have a great honor of interviewing Professor Stephen Hicks. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And we are very happy to meet you here in Greece, in the
yeah.
cradle of Western civilization. And could you briefly introduce to our viewers, say a few words about yourself?
Well, I'm a professor of philosophy. I was born and raised in Canada, and I went to my undergraduate university in Canada and worked for a few years to earn money to go back to university, but I went to the United States for my PhD program, and I ended up getting my professor job in the United States, where my career has been, except for some visiting professor positions in other countries, including Poland, happily, where I had a wonderful time.
Yeah. So let's switch to the
Okay, we have
questions.
a lot of questions, so
140 at least.
Okay, so I hope you are very patient. So, first one. We are meeting in a very special place, so let's start with a warm-up question connected to our surroundings. What did the ancient Greeks give to Western civilization?
A huge amount. Jan used the phrase cradle of civilization or cradle of Western civilization. I think that it's incalculable how important what the Greeks accomplished has been to the development of the West. And I would extend that to say in the modern world, as we have become increasingly global, Greek civilization is not merely now Western civilization, it has become increasingly global civilization. Now the essentials of this, now I'm a philosopher by training, and I won't go too far down the philosophy rabbit hole right at the beginning, but I would say it's a philosophy is about how you look at the world, how you think of yourself as a human being, and the relationship between you and the world and what you are going to accomplish in the world. And there was a character revolution, an intellectual revolution that the Greeks accomplished. And it was quite wide-ranging, and we now use philosophy a little more narrowly now. But this more encompassing understanding of the way the world works, what it is to be a human being, and what it is to be a human being in this world was unique, and the influence has been huge. So not just the birth of philosophy, but the way we think about now the special sciences, physics, biology, chemistry, the engineering mindset that we now have in the Temple of Hephaestus, just off in the distance, is significant here. How we think about poetry and the theater and the literature. It's not an accident that 2.5 millennia later, we all know the stories about the Greek gods and the goddesses and Hercules and Theseus and so forth. All of that has come down to us in thousands of streams and rivulets that all integrate into a coherent culture that is hugely important.
You are a professor of philosophy, and what's important, the head of the Department of Ethics and Entrepreneurship at Rockford University. Is there a connection between philosophy and entrepreneurship? It seems entrepreneurs don't think about it every day because they don't have enough time.
I think I would disagree with the latter part of that. I think being an entrepreneur is a very philosophical enterprise, and my sense is that most entrepreneurs are more thoughtful about their careers, what they are trying to accomplish in their lives, what kind of person they need to be successful in their business. And then particularly since most entrepreneurial ventures start very small, one person, right? That person, as you grow your business, you have to think very carefully about your customers, about every person you hire that you bring into the team, forming the culture, being a leader, and so forth. But I think it even starts earlier than that. So suppose we think about the classic entrepreneur as someone who starts a business, comes up with an idea for a business, and then launches that business. But even before that, when you are a child and you are growing up, and we are all thinking, who do I want to be when I grow up? What kind of person do I want to be? What kind of man do I want to be? What do I want to accomplish in my life? And we make important strategic choices quite early. I can, for example, when I am young, say, I want things, but I'm going to steal them from other people. And from an early age, I learn how to be clever, how to be sneaky, how to lie, how to cheat people. And that becomes my character, and that becomes my philosophy of how I interact with other people. And so I have a thief philosophy, and many people do go down that road. Other people will say, when I am young, I want things, but I don't want to have to work for them. Maybe for various reasons, I stay a child. I want to be lazy. My mother and my father have given me things as I grew up, and I never make that transition to I'm going to be independent and self-supporting. And so I'm going to be as lazy as I can and try to figure out ways to get other people to look after me. And that's a very strategic choice about how you are going to live. And neither of those is an entrepreneurial way of life. Now suppose, and this I would say is much healthier as a developing child. You say, okay, I'm going to grow up, but I don't want to be a child. I want to be independent. I don't want allowance from my mom and dad. I want to get my own place and so forth. But I don't want to steal from other people. I'm going to make my own way in the world. Now that, I think, is a moral accomplishment, and that's a strategic choice about how you're going to live. I'm going to be independent, self-supporting. I'm going to work for a living. And that is a major philosophical choice that children are making when they are young. Now, even there, though, I think there's a fork in the road because, and I think there's a perfectly legitimate choice. You can say, no, I don't want to be an entrepreneur. Maybe I have skills. I like marketing. I like finance. I like running a hardware store. I want to be a farmer. And so I take a job, right, but in a business that someone else has created. And so I'm not an entrepreneur, but I am still self-supporting. I'm adding value to the world. I earn my living. I trade with other people. That's a perfectly, I think, moral choice. And I think that's also a very philosophical choice as a human being to make. Now then, within that fork in the road, so to speak, I think there are people who say, you know, I have my own ideas about what kind of business that I want. And I want to have more autonomy. I want to take my ideas and make them be a reality. Maybe I want to be my own boss. I don't want maybe the comfort of a salary. I want to be more risk aversion. And also I understand with bigger risk comes bigger rewards. And I can make a nice living if I go to work for someone else, but maybe I want to be really rich. And the only way I'm going to get there is by assuming the risks of entrepreneurship. So as a young person, of course, you don't have to be a young person to become an entrepreneur, but nonetheless, this is a very philosophical set of choices you are making. What kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to be autonomous? Do I want to be independent? Do I want to be rich? And I want to create things that other people are going to say, wow, I'm willing to pay a lot of money for that. Right? That, I think, is very philosophical. Now, I think you're right. Once you make those choices, then you make a commitment to starting a business or you take a job. Then you have to start thinking about thousands of little details, and you don't think so much about the principles of your life so much anymore. So you stop being as self-consciously philosophical, but you start being an applied philosopher and living according to those, what I would call philosophical choices that you have made.
My question, interruption.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's deeply rooted in our genes or it's created in our, let's say, culture?
Yeah.
When I remember I was 10 or 4 years old and I look at my little hands and I said, I will do something important with these hands.
Yes.
You know?
I think it is more natural for human beings to be entrepreneurial. So now this partly turns on some developmental psychology, so we would have to consult with psychologists who study children. But in my experience, or you talk about from your first person experience, and I would say the same thing, but also from observing some children I have known. But it does seem natural. You see little children, they want to start exploring the world, and they start manipulating things with their hands, and they start developing skills, and they want to develop those skills, and they take pride in those skills. They say, "Mommy, Daddy, look what I can do." Yeah. So I think that is all maybe proto-entrepreneurship. And I think then the culture part
comes and develops.
That's right. Is that encouraged or is that discouraged by siblings, by parents, by formal schooling, or not?
Mm-hmm. Entrepreneurship and ethics. Do you think entrepreneurs are ethical by nature?
I would say that entrepreneurship, as we've been describing it here, is a deeply ethical choice. So if we say by contrast, we know there are lots of people who commit to a life of crime. I'm going to be a thief, right? Or I'm going to be a paid assassin, right? I'm happy with killing people for money. That's my lifestyle. Or I am going to manipulate people in various ways. Or I am going to be passive and expect the world to give me a living. I'm going to go on welfare and
Social security.
Yeah, not just as, okay, temporarily I have some problems in my life, so I will get back on my feet by using the Social Security, but as a way of life. I think many people we know, they choose that as their lifestyle. And I think that is deeply unethical. So I would say anyone who is choosing to say, I am going to make my living, not take my living, not manipulate my living, not defraud other people to make my living. That is a deeply ethical commitment that one is making. And then further, I think if you go back to Jan's question about being entrepreneurial by nature, if we say, I have my ideas, I have a vision of how the world could be a better place in some way, and you cultivate that, and you say, how can I make my vision more realistic? And rather than just saying, oh, it's a nice idea if this happened, to say, I'm actually going to try it. I'm going to do the experiment. I'm going to, of course, fail a number of times, but I'm not going to give up. I'm going to try again, and I'm going to learn from my mistakes, and the next time I'm going to do it better. I think all of those character traits in philosophy, we start to call them virtues. So we're talking about someone who has decided to be productive instead of parasitical. And that's a character trait that's important, to be creative in their thinking, but also realistic. Just because I have an idea doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good idea. I need to test it. I'm going to be honest. If my idea has falseness or problems, I will not fake and pretend that the data don't say what they are. But that's true. I have to change my idea. And I think those are moral character traits. Socially, I think if I say, look, I have made something, I think it's really good. I'm excited by this, and I want you to buy this. Rather than trying to get your money by stealing it from you, to say, look, I have made something that's going to make your life better. And here it is. And I trust you that you will look at this thing and you will make a judgment. Yes, that's good. And that you will then offer me something in exchange. So I'm trading with you something value for value. That is a deeply moral, social way of interacting with people. So I would say, this is somewhat metaphorical, that a healthy ethic is baked into entrepreneurship for these various reasons.
Mm-hmm. Would entrepreneurs still be ethical if the government stopped controlling the economy? Let's imagine that tomorrow we return to 19th century classical liberalism. Would that change the morality of entrepreneurs?
Yeah. I think people on average would be much more moral to the extent the government is not controlling the economy. Now, this is partly for some public choice economic reasons, which we can talk about. But think about the idea of government control of the economy. Now, there are many, of course, philosophical and economic reasons why people believe in more freedom and in more control, and that's going to be something we should come right back to. But if you have a government-controlled economy, the most important lesson that teaches you is there are authority figures up here in government. They have power. They issue orders to you about what you should do. And they are going to be observing you carefully to make sure you follow their orders. Right? Now that is already a different kind of morality that is being put in place socially. What that is saying, it's an authoritarian kind of morality, in contrast to what we would say is a more freedom-oriented mentality where people are making their own choices and interacting with each other on a voluntary basis. But what that teaches you right from the beginning is to be a good person, according to this morality, is to comply with higher authority, to do what it tells you, and to always be worried that someone in higher authority is watching you, that makes sure you are not doing wrong things. And I think that is a deeply inhuman and certainly unhumanistic approach to ethics. That by contrast, if you take away that oversight authoritarian model, what you are telling to people is, I trust you. Not 100%, but I trust you that by and large you will be competent to look after your own life, that you can solve your problems, you can figure out what your goals are, how to achieve them, and that by negotiating and trading with other people, we can work together voluntarily to establish various kinds of institutions to make my business work, to make our broader economy work. And I think that is much more moral. So I think a self-responsibility, trusting ethic is more moral than a compliance-based, more authorities looking over your shoulders approach to ethics. So to the extent that we're going down a government-controlled direction, I think we're going to create more people who are unethical. More people get used to the idea that my job as a person is just to follow the rules, to do what higher authority says. I don't have self-responsibility and importantly, agency. Now, the second thing I would say on this is the public choice economics point. James Buchanan, you may know this name, Nobel Prize winner in economics, is most famously associated with school. One thing that we do know is that to the extent that you concentrate power in the government in any area, right, it sets certain power incentives and changes a social dynamic. So we have seen this in the history of religion to the extent that government is controlling religion, for example. Right? Religion loses its autonomy and starts to become a tool of politics. And then, of course, the different religions start to try to control the politicians, and sometimes they are doing so they then are able to use politics for their religious ends. And there's just huge amounts of corruption and terrible results that the entire history of religion teach us about that. I would say exactly the same thing happens when you have government control of the economy. What you start happening is people with power, that is government officials, then start to be able to manipulate businesses and the economy for their political purposes. And some of them are going to be corruptions, right? I will benefit myself, I will benefit my family, I will benefit my friends, I will benefit people who give me bribes, and these are then the economy being run not based on good economic principles, but based on political principles. Many of them are corrupt. What it also, though, teaches is a significant number of business people is that you will succeed in business, not to the extent that you have creative ideas, that you make good products, that you are innovative, that you are offering values to the customers who are voluntarily paying you and giving your profits, that one very profitable, at least this is accounting profitability, way to become successful in your business is by politics. You make sure you know the right politicians. You contribute to the right political groups. right? You get your cousins and your brothers and sisters and so on to go into various regulatory agencies or to run for various offices so that you have connections in politics. And now what you then have is people who go into the business world and their skill set is not entrepreneurship, innovation and so forth. Their skill set is being good politicians in the business sense. And to the extent that those people dominate in the economy, you don't have a healthy economy. It also, though, it's a vicious cycle, because then suppose, I'm a very good politician. My second cousin is the minister for this, that, or the other thing. But you are my competitor and you're trying to be an entrepreneur and be innovative and pay attention. And you're working really hard and you've got a good product. But then you see me, I'm your competitor, right? And my product is not as good as yours, right? But mine is crowding yours out, right? You become discouraged, you become demoralized. You might say, I'm just going to give up. I'm not even going to try. And so we lose you, right? Or you might then say, well, look, why should I try to be a really good entrepreneur? Why shouldn't I become like this guy and start to play the political game, right? In which case you become a more corrupt individual and the economy, to the extent we scale that up, becomes worse. So I think government control of the economy is a net negative, and that we will be much more healthy economically, much more moral to the extent that we have a more liberal market-based economy.
Because when you start to play political game, you lose the opportunity to be a good entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
You cannot divide, you cannot split your virtues to this and that.
Sure, that's right.
I think so.
So, to use the American example, how much time as the CEO are you spending thinking about the market, training your new people, long-term strategic visions? How much of your time are you spent thinking about politicians and what's going on in Washington and consulting with your lawyers and your lobbyists and so forth? So if half of my time is focused on Washington, then that's 50% of my
Maybe
valuable,
even more.
perhaps more, that's right, that I'm not spending on genuine business activities.
And this process kills all socialistic systems, I think. It was the same in Poland couple 20, 30 years ago.
That's right.
And it killed this country.
Yeah, this is just one line of argument, or one reason why socialist economies are failing. I think partly, they demoralize people.
Yeah.
And sometimes as part of their official philosophy, entrepreneurship is just banned. You're not allowed to be an entrepreneur. So you take all of that creative energy out of the system. Now, there are other problems with socialism, but this is a huge subset of them.
You once said, in older socialist writings, you can often see signs of resentment, jealousy, anger, and joy about the destruction that the socialist revolution will bring when capitalists finally get what they deserve. Do you think this will ever stop? If people would become richer, for example, in 100 or 200 years, and only work, 3 days a week for 5 hours.
Yeah.
Will that anger and envy disappear?
Yeah. That's a very rich question. I know you're bringing this from my book on postmodernism, which is a subset, and much of early postmodernism was politicized philosophy in action, and much of it coming from far left-wing politics. Much of it was explicitly socialistic in nature. Now, I do think, though, that setting that aside, if we look at the broader history of socialism, I think some socialists come to their socialism more naively and more honestly, that it's not necessarily a character problem, that they can genuinely believe for various reasons that socialism is about being nice, about sharing things, and maybe having a more rational control of the economy. But I'm not convinced that that is a majority of socialists, and I don't think it's a majority of socialist intellectuals who are informed, particularly after, I would say, 1800, the last 200 years or so. So the quotation you're there is, when you read the socialists, so much, one sign of this, I would say, is that how much of their energy is directed toward the hated enemy. I hate rich people. I resent rich people. I am envious that these people have so much more than I do.
But this hate is deeply rooted in all of us. We
Okay.
don't like it, I think, and they profit from this. They use this feature of the human being.
Yes. I disagree that this hate is in all of us. I think this goes back to earlier character issues. So let's try a different analogy. Suppose we think about the Olympic Games, and here we are in Athens, right? So we might then say all of us as human beings, we have physical bodies, and we would all like to be more athletic than we are, more beautiful than we are, have a better sex life than we are, be more admired, right, than we are. We all have physical weaknesses, right, and so on. So that, I think, is part of the human condition. But then if we start to say, how do I react when I see, say, genuinely fast people? Now, when I was younger, I was quite athletic, and I was on track teams and so on. And I remember a large number of times coming in second place in races. I didn't win. Sometimes I won, but a lot of times I came in second place. There was always another guy who was a little bit faster. Now, I will be disappointed that I did not win the race. But if I then say, I hate that guy, there's a character issue in there. And there's a difference between people who will say, I lost, but he ran faster, right? And so he won the race, fair and square. And my disappointment does not go down the road of envy and resentment and so forth, versus then we start to talk about the Olympic Games, and I will confess every 4 years I am a junkie for the Olympic Games. I just watch it as much as I possibly can. There are differences between people who will say, I hate people who are faster, stronger, and so forth, versus those who say, wow, that's not me, but I admire those people, and I look up to those people. And that's a fundamental character difference in human beings. Now, the same thing I think applies, this is the analogy, to the economy. When I am a young person and I see someone who has a beautiful car, right? And there I am, and actually during my 20s, I didn't own a car until I was 29. I had my bicycle. And so I would see lots of guys who have cars and sometimes really nice cars. Did I resent those guys? Did I hate those guys? Did I want to scratch their car? If I did, that's a character problem. Or did I say, wow, that guy got a car somehow. What can I learn from him? So maybe in 10 years, I will be able to have a nice car. That's a fundamental fork in the road. Go ahead.
But you can steal from the rich. They have resources.
Yes.
You cannot steal from the runner his velocity, his characteristic and feature of being the fastest guy in the world.
Yes.
Okay, I agree with you.
Now you can, and we're going down into this point. So one thing you can then do is to say, as a socialist, I want to steal from the rich in order to elevate the poor. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you see in socialists that seems to be a genuine motivation. They really believe that with the right redistribution scheme, the problems of poverty can be solved and we can elevate human beings. Now, these are not the people, though, psychologically, whom Wojciech's question is directed to. There's a subset for whom that is a cover story, and it's quite transparent that they are much more interested in bringing the rich down for the sake of bringing the rich down. And to go back to the athlete analogy, this would be the person who then will sabotage their competition. Right? And we see lots of historical examples of this in order to make that person less able to compete well. So probably the most famous example of this is in figure skating from 20 or so years ago when Tonya Harding, right, the figure skater, who was a very good figure skater, but there was another figure skater whose name is escaping me right now, who was thought to be slightly better. And Tonya Harding, with her boyfriend and her boyfriend's friend, made a point of damaging the other figure skater. When that figure skater was practicing, it went to her with a hard stick and damaged her leg. So that's not, so you can take away the assets of other people. Yeah. So another example I would say is just to use the car example. There are many people who will see, say, a beautiful car in the parking lot, And the reaction is not, wow, that's a beautiful car. I would like to have a beautiful car someday.
Yeah.
They'll say, that's a beautiful car. I hate that guy. And they will take their key and walk along the side of the car and damage. You are intentionally damaging a beautiful thing, a thing that you admire. That's a very different psychology.
You also said that in postmodernism, these emotions are even stronger. Pure love for destruction.
Yes.
Really?
Yes. I think really, yes. So postmodernism, at least politicized postmodernism. So here we are talking about the generation of the 1960s and the 1970s. I think one thing that happens then is that in the old left, the old socialists, I think there was a larger number of people who really thought with a Marxist revolution, or perhaps with a Rousseauian revolution, different species, we can create a better world. And we really believe that there is something morally wrong with capitalism. That there is a subset of deep socialist intellectuals who don't believe that anymore. So their situation is that they have grown up hating capitalism and admiring socialism. But by the 1950s and the 1960s, they don't believe that anymore because they recognize that capitalism continues to be very successful in the world and that socialism has been a disaster. It has been an economic disaster in the 1950s and the 1960s. It has been a humanitarian disaster after the revelations of Stalin's terrible crimes and Lenin before him become apparent after Stalin dies, 1953. And so at that point, I think there's a character revelation that occurs in socialist thinkers. Do you say, well, look, I was a socialist because I genuinely believe that socialism would create a better place, and I'm a social scientist, right? So if you are honest about that, when your theory fails, what you do is you say honestly, my theory failed. And so I need to rethink my theory. I need to try another theory. Maybe I need to be more open-minded. I thought capitalism and liberalism was wrong. Give it another investigation. This is not what you see in the first generation of postmodern thinkings. They are hating capitalism still, and they are crushed by the failure of socialism. And at that point, you have to make a choice about what you are doing. If you double down and then say, there are no ideals, and part of the postmodern package is to say there are no ideals. We're not striving for a better world. We think is just naked exploitation of all different groups against everyone. Capitalism is one form of naked exploitation, and we are just going to enter into this exploitative power struggle on behalf of different groups. And that is a different psychology at work, and that's the people we're talking about there.
Mm-hmm. Another quote from you, postmodernism is full of people who like destroying the work of others,
yes,
but don't want to create anything themselves.
Yes.
What does it look like in real life, in practice?
Okay, I think the best examples of this would be from art in the 20th century. So you think you're a young person and the standard psychology of someone who wants to become an artist. I want to create beautiful sculptures, be a great painter. I want to write the great American novel or become a musician. And we all know this as human beings. Even if we don't become artists, we have some of these impulses and we can respond to all of the beautiful, noble, elevating things that the art world brings to us. But we know the psychology of people who are failures in the art world. Suppose you want to become a great novelist, but by the time you are 35, 40, you realize you are not that good. What does that do to you psychologically? I am going to go to Hollywood and become a great screenwriter, or I'm going to be a great actor. And then by the time you are 35 or 40, or perhaps younger, you fail and you have to go back to your home as a failure. And meanwhile, you see other people who are doing great things in the art world and succeeding. And you look at all of the great artists in the past who have succeeded and you love them. But you are now thinking of yourself as a failure. You know you will never live up to that standard. What do you do in that moment? We know there are many people for whom that sense of failure leads to a sense of frustration, rage. And there's that strong word again, I hate people who are successful. And it turns to a kind of destruction. Most of us now of this generation say, to take a slightly different analogy, have played video games, or we have played sports when we are young. And I think I'm going to be a really good athlete and I can learn this sport very well. Suppose I go out and I play tennis, right? And I want to play well. I think of myself as a pretty good tennis player, right? But some guy comes along and I'm having a bad day and I'm just losing. My shots are going out. What do I do? My image of myself as a good tennis player is shown to be not true. And so I take my racket and I smash it on the ground, right? And I start with my adversary saying bad things about that adversary and so forth. So imagine elevating that to someone who really was passionate about the art world and becoming a great artist. And you see it quite nakedly in the high modernist and postmodernist artists. They will then explicitly start doing things like, and this will be disgusting, and there's lots of examples of this, 20s, 30s, 40s in the 20th century. I will take my feces, right, and throw it at a work of art. I will make, for example, a Venus de Milo, most beautiful woman ever. I will make a paper mache version of the Venus de Milo, and then I will go over there with a rifle, and I will literally shoot holes in the Venus de Milo and film myself shooting holes in the Venus de Milo. What is that saying as a statement? This idealized feminine beauty, I want to kill that. There are examples of artists who will take beautiful instruments, beautiful violins, grand pianos in the music world, and they will do what they call performance art, where they'll say, we're all musicians, come with me, but we're going to first go to the hardware store. I am going to get a big hammer. You are going to get a saw. And we are going to then have a beautiful grand piano, and we will pay $10,000 for this grand piano, and we will film ourselves. I'm going to start hammering this, and you will take your saw and start destroying it. That is destruction of beauty, nobility, elegance. The 20th century world of postmodern art is full of examples of that. And I haven't even mentioned the most disgusting examples of that. So that psychology comes from somewhere. And that's where you see it in art. Sometimes you see it in social relationships. You see it in politics as well, and other zones of human life.
And by the way, how do you understand the concept of postmodernism?
Yes, the concept of postmodernism is, to break it down, post after modernism. So it is partly a historical label to say, if you take the entire modern world, that we think the entire modern world is a mistake and that it has led to disasters in various ways. And so we critique all of the modern world's fundamental ideas and institutions, that we want to destroy the modern world to go on to something else. So then the question is, what do you take the modern world to be philosophically and historically? So the modern world, most historians will say, my favorite date here is 1500. So 1500, Columbus has just crossed the ocean a few years ago. We have Gutenberg's new printing presses springing up all over Europe, so there's going to be an era of literacy. Michelangelo, Leonardo, a little bit older with those transformations of art. Martin Luther is just finishing school, and so the Protestant Reformation and the transformation of the world religiously is about to happen. You can see the beginnings of science. So your fellow Pole Copernicus is a student, and we're going to transform our understanding of it's going to become the solar system in our way of thinking. But at the same time, you see the beginnings of more scientific method in different areas. So the point here is, in terms of exploration in global society, art, religion, science. It's revolutionary things that are happening in the modern world. And in philosophical terms, we always date modern philosophy to thinkers who are born in the late 1500s. So Francis Bacon, René Descartes, so new methods of thinking. So we're going to question everything and reduce everything to empirical evidence or to fundamental insights that rationally I can grasp and deduce logically everything from that, instead of appealing to authority, the authority of the church or the authority of scripture. We will question everything all of the way down. So that then is to say, you know, philosophy and art and science, exploration, the economy and so forth, everything is being transformed. Now the postmoderns then want to say, okay, modern world was a great break with the pre-modern world. And it was revolutionary. And we've been experimenting with this and transforming society now for, say, 400 years as we get into the 1900s. We, though, think that philosophically, that's a mistake. It's too rational, it's too empirical, it's too individualistic, it's too optimistic. It believes in progress, that we can make everything in the world a better place. But we think all of those things are false philosophically. We think that the institutions and the transformations of society, particularly the capitalistic ones and the more liberal ones, have been terrible and led to awful social results. So the philosophers of postmodernism want to subvert all of those philosophical fundamentals. But then the other postmoderns who are working in the other cultural spheres, economy, politics, art, how we think about religion and so forth, are working on saying we need to subvert all of those modern ideas and institutions in the direction of something post. And what that post is another big open question.
Okay, so next question, it's about the human features, about desire to dominate or exploit others. Do you think that if some of us get a chance to dominate or exploit, which is very profitable, he will use it? So I would say that every politician uses this feature. He wants to exploit, he wants to dominate, he wants to give the orders. And what do you think about entrepreneurs? Do they use this feature or not?
Yeah. I think you are right to say that it's part of human nature for us to have the urge to dominate in various contexts. But that's a very broad concept that we're talking about. So I'm say a little boy, and I have my little brother. And now it's possible that I will feel brotherly love and protective toward my little brother. But it's also going to be when I'm a kid at various points. I like the fact that I can physically control my little brother and make him do various things that I will. And I think when we are children, we will experiment with both modes of interacting. I think it's natural, even if it's not big brother, little brother, with my friends, that we are partly rivalrous, partly cooperative, partly competitive. And when we are children, we are going to experiment with all of those modes of human interaction. And at various points, we will make decisions about which ones we think are right. But I think it's going to be a choice that we make. So I don't want to say that it's built into human nature that you have to become a social dominator with respect to other people. I think most people, most of the time, grow up to be healthy. And they will say, on most issues, I want to just do my thing, and I want to have my own projects and develop my own skills. And I become friends and associate with other people who are more or less like-minded. I do think a minority of people choose the social domination route. They organize themselves in gangs, right, where I'm the boss or I want to be the boss. Of course, a lot of them just are looking for someone to lead them, and so they willingly become a follower, and they will dominate other people at the boss's order in order to be part of the gang. So I think that also is a common feature as well. Now, part of your question, though, is to say in the broad scope of history, we start looking for analogs. I would say probably for most of human history, the dominant modes have been domination models. Right? So it's my tribe against your tribe, right? Or I succeed in building an empire and I become the king, right? Or the czar or whoever. And that's an explicitly hierarchical domination model. And I think one of the achievements, and this is partly why the Greeks matter so much, is a breaking away from that domination model to a more production, independence, cooperation model that with fits and starts back and forth for the last 2,000 years, we have been progressively realizing. So I still think, yes, some subsectors of our economy, politics is probably the most fraught from, the fraught one. I don't think I'm quite as cynical about, I'm pretty cynical about politicians, but not quite as cynical as your statement about politicians are. But yes, politics I think is an especially morally challenging discipline or part of society, because by its nature, politics is about the use of force. Everything that we say we are going to do politically, we're not going to do this in terms of voluntary families or voluntary sporting associations or businesses, and we're going to come to the market and trade our goods with each other. And you don't have to deal with me, or sporting associations or whatever. You don't have to play on my sporting team. Politics is about the use of force. When are we going to send the police to someone? Under what circumstance are we going to put you on trial in a court of law that is guarded by bailiffs with weapons? Under what circumstances are we going to physically take your property and perhaps put you in a prison or kill you? Another feature of government is the military. Under what circumstances do we have to start killing those other guys? So the essence of politics is the use of force, and under what circumstances we are going to use force. And that's the deepest question of politics. So to your question, anyone who is attracted to an institution that is about using force, you immediately, I think, have to raise a question mark about their character, or it's going to be a highlighted question about their character. Why are you so interested in being part of an institution that dedicates itself to the use of force? Mm-hmm. And if you don't have a very good answer about why you think it's moral to use force in these questions, if you just like the idea of being powerful and having the police and the military at your disposal for whatever you want, that's morally questionable at best. And certainly the historical record of politicians teaches us that these are perhaps the most dangerous people historically in all of society historically.
And the second part of this question, because if you want to dominate, you need the people who are vulnerable to be dominated. Mm. And the question is, you know, the situation in the North Korea. So they admire their beautiful leader and they devote to himself unconditionally. I read a book about the period of Germany in 1930s. It was the situation with the German people was even worse than in the North Korea nowadays. I was completely astonished. Why the people devote themselves and they gave all prerogatives to the one leader like a Hitler, and they don't even ask, you know, they don't see all bad things he's doing.
Yes. So the political examples are striking. There's lots of examples from the history of religion, right, that are striking. Even outside of that, we do know that there are people who are cultish with respect to all sorts of things. That might even go back to some examples from the history of art and music. You know, I'm a young person and I might have some creative impulses, but nonetheless, there is some great musician or some great artist, and when I approach that person, I will adopt a cultish, submissive, following demeanor with respect to that person, just to be a part of that circle. So there is certainly that as a possibility in human nature. Now, the political examples, I think, are important because when we are young, I think we are much more impressionable. And if we are exposed only to one way of thinking, one mode, we are not able to consider other alternatives politically, then I think it's going to be the 1 in a million or 1 in 10 million people who is independent-minded enough and genius who's even going to be able to conceive of another alternative. So part of it is just going to be cognitive. It is just simple brainwashing by the parents, by all of the social institutions from the very beginning. And then we add the incentivizing part, all of the social incentives. If you don't do this, you learn very quickly bad things will happen to you. And if you do this, you will get various social rewards. So the entire incentive structure has been worked out in that social system, and it has been institutionalized. So I do not fault the average North Korean of this generation for being in that circumstance. You've created a robotic, cultish personality. I'm less inclined to let the Germans of the 1920s and 1930s off the hook, because intellectual Germans, or even average Germans, by the 1920s, the Germans were the most literate people in the world in terms of the number of books sold, the number of newspapers that were sold, magazines. So they were readers, and they were also well aware of the history of Germany with, its great cultural achievement, including traditions of liberalism and great accomplishments and so forth. And before the Germans closed off the society by the time we got to post-1933, they were well aware of what was going on in other parts of the world. So you cannot say that this was a cognitive brainwashing from birth that had occurred. So they knew that there were alternatives. They had been educated about the alternatives. Even during the 1920s, during the Weimar Republic, you had genuine political alternatives. You had social democrats, you had communists, you had some more overtly religious parties that were centrist and some that were more liberal and so on. So when you have literate people who are aware of their own diverse history, they're aware of other cultures, they are aware of different parties. If a plurality of people are voting for National Socialists, that's an informed choice, and that's a different kind of moral choice that's at work. Now, by the time you get to the later 1930s, then you have younger generation of Germans who are more brainwashed, we might say, because the Nazis quickly transformed the educational system. And then also they were very sophisticated in altering the incentive structures for all of the other institutions as well. So you could see other people would say, well, sure, I will get the rewards if I follow enthusiastically, or at least pretend to follow enthusiastically. And so it becomes much more of a moral heroism to be able to preserve your independence of mind, to resist in various ways, and even to make the choice to get out of this country, as to their credit, hundreds of thousands of Germans, and perhaps even millions of Germans did.
So let's go back to the quotes, your quotes, and let's dig deeper in the human nature. So you once said, the weak feel frustrated. They can't get what they want in life. They start to envy the strong. And at the same time, they secretly hate themselves for being weak and afraid. They can't live with this, so they create excuses to believe they are good and moral. In a market economy, the strong are often entrepreneurs. So, will a capitalist always be an enemy of the weak, at least in the eyes of the weak?
Yes. The context from that quote from the Explaining Postmodernism is to talk about Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher who died in 1900. Influential on the National Socialists of Germany, whom we were just talking about, and then in the next generation, extraordinarily influential on the first generation of postmodern thinkers, Michel Foucault and others. And what he has developing here is the concept of what he calls resentment psychology, or ressentiment psychology. And he's using it in a more generalized form. How does someone who is deeply envious, deeply resentful, think about themselves and think about other people? And what Nietzsche is trying to figure out is why it is that there are so many people from his context, 19th century culture, who do seem to be motivated primarily by envy, resentment, hatred, destruction, and so forth. That I just want to blow up random people on the street, right? And now I might, have a political overlay. Oh, it's because of these bad politicians. But if you're willing to not just target those bad politicians, but you're willing to blow up random people on the street for a political purpose, that's saying something about humans in general. Or if you're willing to destroy works of art and other kinds of institutions. Now, what Nietzsche is arguing is that there's a certain kind of weakness, a psychological weakness at work. And what's interesting about this is that for Nietzsche, this is something about human nature, or a certain kind of human nature, that this comes from us, not from external social circumstances. And so one of the interesting contrasts then in this era philosophically is if you take the Marxists, who are often, when you read them, motivated by envy and desire, hatred for the rich and so forth, the official Marxist explanation is to say that human beings are born a blank slate, and they are totally molded by their economic circumstances externally. And because of those economic circumstances, people who are become hateful of capitalism, it's because of the capitalist system has forced them into a certain mode of life and exploited them. So it's not something about human nature, it's something wrong with the external system. Nietzsche is saying that doesn't seem to be true, because here you have people who come from good families. They're prosperous, they went to good schools, they had, say, reasonable religion. They have career prospects open to them. They can read whatever they want. They can be artists, but nonetheless, independently of their very comfortable, positive social circumstances, they hate the world. Why is that? And the argument that Nietzsche is offering is that they, despite their exterior social circumstances, they don't feel themselves adequate to the circumstance, to making a go in their lives. They say, I don't think that I can live a free life. I'm too scared of it. I don't think I can build a great business or become a successful artist and so forth. I feel inadequate to that occasion. But that's a very hard thing to handle psychologically, to self-doubt yourself, to self-critique yourself. And there's always an easy excuse to say, anytime there's something wrong, it's not me. It can't be me. It has to be something out there. Yeah. And so you go looking for a reason that excuses you for the weakness. But it's a cover story, Nietzsche says. He says, you tell yourself this story, it's the world that is against me, or I didn't have a chance, or I got the lucky breaks, or that guy was a bad guy and did something bad to me and I couldn't recover from that. But really, you can never quite convince yourself of that. And so you have this internal conflict that you are always there. You doubt yourself, you know that you're a weakling, but you're trying to convince yourself that it's not your problem, that it's these really bad guys. But then every once in a while, someone comes by in a beautiful car and has a beautiful girlfriend, lives in a beautiful house, and it just makes all of the ugliness inside of you come out. And it comes out in an ugly form, because you can't live with that lie, or you can't hide that lie for that moment. So that is the psychology that Nietzsche is exploring. And what he wants to argue is that there's a lot of that can't be explained on social circumstances ground. It has to be something weak in psychology. But he still has that question why some humans seem to be prone to it. There's lots of them, whereas lots of people seem to be immune from it. Because there still are lots of people who will say, yeah, I have weaknesses, I failed, but I'm going to learn from those weaknesses. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to improve myself. And this guy is doing a lot better than I am. I admire that guy, and I'm going to try to learn from that guy and improve myself. So what is this difference? He thinks there's some psychology at work there. Very interestingly, almost always at the same time as Fyodor Dostoevsky, the great Russian novelist, who is exploring exactly this psychological territory with the underground man. Who has a nice job as a government clerk, so he's not going to worry that he won't have a roof over his head or clothing or food on the table. He's not the exploited poor, but he's full of envy and resentment and just likes to make other people's lives difficult. Where is this coming from? And for Dostoevsky, as for Nietzsche, he's pointing, say, the social science external explanations don't work. It's a psychology question that we have to attend to.
In Poland, there was a viral video that became very popular and was watched millions of times over the years. It was a debate between a strange conservative liberal politician and a young social democrat.
Bardzo proszę, lewica.
Panie prezesie, do pana takie pytanie, ponieważ bardzo mocno krytykuje pan rozwiązania społecznej gospodarki rynkowej. Tej zimy było takie badanie, w którym kraju Europy obywatele najmniej boją się o swoje finanse. Pierwsze miejsce Norwegia, drugie miejsce Szwecja, trzecie Finlandia. Tam,
a nie było Islandii przypadkiem?
nie było Islandii.
Nie było Islandii, popatrz pan.
No,
bo to może robiono po Islandii.
Była, ale nie była w pierwszej trójce, panie prezesie. Jednak tam funkcjonuje, jak pan to nazywa, ten wredny socjalizm. 3 na 100 obywateli tylko boi się o swoje pieniążki, to chyba nie jest tak dużo, prawda? Może jednak idźmy tą drogą, a nie korwinizmami, które mają 0,2 poparcia w społeczeństwie, no jest tragedią jakąś okrutną.
Proszę pana, spośród 2 armii, z których jedna wygrywa wojnę, a druga siedzi w Pieleszach, w tej pierwszej się bardziej boją o swoje życie, ale oni zwyciężają. Bo widzi pan, celem życia nie jest przeżycie.
A co?
To ja, przepraszam, nie będę zastępował pańskich nauczycieli. Ludzie mają swoje cele, mają swoje ambicje, mają swoje ideały i za to walczą i umierają. A pan chce tylko żyć. No i pan sobie żre
Tak,
i żyje dalej.
Chcesz... Mam nadzieję, że będę miał za co żreć i żyć dalej, panie prezydencie.
Proszę pana, jak powiedział wybitny krakowianin Stanisław Lem, na dnie oceanu w rowie mariańskim są rurkowce. One żyją sobie całkowicie bezpiecznie od milionów lat.
Wie pan co,
sobie.
przykro mi, ale dobre wychowanie tutaj musi za to mieć faktografia. No nie jest pan normalnym człowiekiem.
Panie prezesie, odniosłem wrażenie, że po raz pierwszy jest pan któryś raz u nas już w programie, ale pierwszy raz widzę pana wyprowadzonego z równowagi.
Ja nie jestem prowadzony z równowagi, proszę pana, tylko usiłowałem podkreślić dobitnie, że mnie brzydzą tego typu poglądy, że najważniejsze jest się dobrze nażreć. Niestety celem życia nie jest dobrze się nażreć, celem życia nie jest bezpieczeństwo. Mnie uczono, za komuny to było, ale mnie uczono, kto nie ryzykuje, ten nie je. A was się uczy przezorny, zawsze ubezpieczony. Tfu.
We have the transcript of this, and
Yes.
probably you got it. You know this transcript.
Yes, I recall.
So, how would you describe these two views? One says the goal of life is not just to survive. People have goals, dreams, and values. They fight for them. Even they can lose their life for these goals. And other is saying, I just hope that I can afford to eat. I like to be a consumer. Just that's it.
Yeah. Well, I think that does speak to a difference in aspiration level that one acquires typically when one's life. I think as natural as a human being, you start to think about what you will want to accomplish in your life. You read stories, you meet other people, you see television programs and movies, and you consider all of the options, but at the same time you will make a judgment about realism. What realistically do I think I can accomplish? So I might love sports and say I want to be a great athlete when I'm 10 years old, but then realistically I realize I might be a good athlete, but I'm never going to be Olympic level quality or whatever. So I think that's a natural dynamic for human beings when they are young. And I think we continue to engage in that self-reflective dynamic throughout our lives. I might reach middle age and say, okay, my life has not been what I wanted it to be. Do I give up and say that's it, and I just coast through retirement? Or do I say, no, I need to reinvent myself and I will, in effect, become a life entrepreneur and go and strive to do, because I think more is possible. And I think it is a perennial lifetime issue and a perennial human experience issue that we're always navigating that choice. What I think is appearing in the transcription is the debate between these two people is that elevated to partly a commentary on current political economy of Europe, say, or Poland more narrowly, and partly an elevated to a more philosophical principle. But there is this issue about what do we mean by human life and what should our core goal be? And obviously, part of it is to say, my goal is to survive. And if I think surviving is good, then I want to survive for a long time. So there's a quantity measurement that we add to that as well. But also there are quality measurements. It might not be that I just want to live for a long time. I want to live for a long time living a full human life. And so that then is where some hard philosophical work has to be done, because what do we mean by living a full human life? So in philosophy, we call this the survival flourishing debate. So what it is to be a human being is to survive, right? And that's typically a stripped down, minimalist understanding of what it is to be alive. That your aspirations are not too high. You might say that even being too much of an aspirationalist or too idealistic or too romantic, so to speak, is a philosophical mistake. So just survive, right? Versus the flourishing concept, and the flourishing concept is most rooted, again, here we are in Athens, in Aristotelian philosophy, where you want to have a more robust understanding of what it is to be a human being. You are a body, right, with a mind, and so I want to live well physically, but I also want to live well mentally and psychologically, and so I want to have a very full life. And so it's much more than idealistic, much more likely to have a romanticized understanding of what human life should be, but they will argue that being a romantic still is realistic. So maybe an analogy is a good example here. I remember when I was a child being disturbed one day. I grew up in Canada, and as children do, I went to a zoo. I think my parents took me to a zoo, and Toronto had a big zoo, but it was a more old-fashioned zoo. And I remember, I'd read stories about African animals, lions and elephants, and so you have this sense of the majesty, and of course the brutality also that's possible on the African plains, and the struggle of survival, and crocodiles, and giant snakes and so forth. But this idea of the lion as this majestic animal that is powerful, and of course it has to fight with the other lions and protect the tribe against the baboons, and rivalries with other lions, and hopefully having a good sex life with the lionesses as well. So there's a certain conception of what a lion's life would be that is idealized. And I remember as a boy going to the Toronto Zoo, and I saw a lion, and it was in a cage. And immediately I was somewhat disturbed by this. And the lion was a little bit scrawny, so it wasn't very robust. It wasn't unhealthy. It was fed regularly. It had good veterinarian care and so on. And it had one or two trees and plants, but basically it was a cage. And you could see the pathways around the edge of the cage that the lion had walked thousands and thousands of times. And food was brought to it, and it had a big water dish and so on. And at that point I was not able to articulate severely what was disturbing about this. But it does speak to this issue about bare survival as the human goal versus a flourishing concept as the human goal. Because we could say, in one sense, the lion is living the best possible life. He doesn't have to worry about baboons or crocodiles. He doesn't have to worry about ever being hungry. He's going to be fed every single day. He will never be thirsty. He's never going to be attacked by predators and parasites, and there's modern science that will, you will get the right injections and so on, and it will live a long life, but it's in a cage. And if that disturbs you, then you have to start saying, that's not actually the best, just hoping to survive as a lion. If that's what that means, your bare physical needs are looked after is not enough. That the lion also, we might then say, is partly a psychological being. And what's more natural, I'm not talking about human nature now, but lion nature, is to be out there in the wild, where there's danger, where there's risk, where there is rivalry. And you have to develop your full physical capacities and your full mental capacities, whatever those are, as a lion, to live the best flourishing life. So that is to say, you have to dream the lion dream. And if you take that dream away from the lion, even if everything physically is perfect for the lion, it's less of a lion. And so by analogy, we would say the same thing for human beings. But for us, because of the nature of our minds, our psychology, it's even more complicated. Yes, we do need risk, we do need adventure, we do need rivalry. That we don't want to just be, to put it bluntly, welfare state, social security. My check arrives every month, and I have something on the television every night that I can watch, and I can have my bottle of beer, and I don't have to worry about everything, and I will get all of the right injections because someone is paying for my health care. From that perspective, that is not a full human life. So I'd say philosophically then, in response to this, I am much more on the side of the one who says, yes, survival, but survival as a human being. And part of being a human being is not just keeping your body fit and healthy, but keeping your mind and your whole soul engaged. And that a human life is an adventure, and it should be, to use our earlier analogy, an entrepreneurial adventure. But I do have some sympathy for the person on the other side, who I think is speaking to a younger generation. Although there you find people like this in every generation, who for various reasons, the romantic adventure, entrepreneur sense of life does not seem realistic to that person anymore. That what they see is not very many opportunities. Perhaps they have not been educated or in the right kind of family where their youthful dreams have been made to seem realistic, that they've developed the psychological resources, or that they have been taught a certain view of the way society is, that if they try to achieve their dreams, society is going to beat them down in various ways. So they've had that fuller sense of what is the human potential educated out of them, and in some cases miseducated. And so from their perspective, it does seem realistic to have a very minimal set of goals for their life and not to be confident that those can be realized. And I think that's a great tragedy.
And let me ask you a philosophical question, which is exact question as well, and very personal one. Once upon a time, I visited the Penguin National Park somewhere in the world, and the ranger said that when the penguin is living in the wild, it lives about 7 years. When it lives in the zoo and is protected, it lives 22 years. Which kind of life you will choose?
Yes, so that's a nice sliding scale. So if we get social scientists, I know you have engineering trail, then we would want to put this on a two-dimensional graph, right? So we can maximize the quantity of life along the x-axis, or we can maximize the quality of life, right, along the y-axis. And then we could say, well, but then perhaps to optimize, it would just be the 45-degree angle linear line and so forth. So I think, obviously, we want to say if we think life is good, then we want to maximize on both dimensions. Although I do think that there are going to be individualized judgment calls here. And some people will be more willing to trade off longevity for quality. I think also our estimations along the lifespan are going to change as one gets older. So I know when we start to think about end-of-life issues and we think about euthanasia issues, we do think, okay, perhaps I'm 85 5 years old and I'm starting to fail physically, I could spend $100,000 on more medical care to get 2 more years of life saved.
Or just buy a bullet.
That's right. Okay, and I would then not have 2 years of life, but I would save that $100,000 and it would go to my grandchildren. And so the judgment there is, from my quality of life perspective, knowing that my grandchildren will have more opportunities. That's a value to me. That's an important value to me. Is that worth 2 years of minimal quality living? So I think it becomes very personalized very quickly.
What do you think? Are the United States closer to the idea that life is not just about survival, and the contrary, Europe is closer to, I hope I can afford to eat?
Yes, I think that's a very difficult judgment to make and require that I do more social science empirics in both countries.
But the feeling?
But yes, I would say yes. The United States has, from its origin, been a more entrepreneurial, romantic, aspirational culture than Europe has been. At the same time, I want to say that that romantic, aspirational culture was first developed in Europe and transplanted to the United States. And perhaps because everything was new and open, and it was brought over by immigrants, and immigrant psychology is a different kind of psychology, that it took root and flourished more. Whereas in Europe, those ideas were first developed here, and it did significantly. I mean, Europe has accomplished amazing things in the modern world, but at the same time, Europe also has deep traditional roots that have been going back a long time in human history to prehistory, and so there's more of a cultural ballast, so we say, that it has to be carried along, and much more of an overt tension between what I would say is a more modern outlook and a more pre-modern outlook as well. And that's a very broad set of cultural issues. And I think very quickly you'd have to start dividing Eastern Europe from Western Europe. But even in Eastern Europe, the post-Soviet republics, obviously Poland, the experience in Poland is a great success story in the last 30 years compared to some of the other countries where their transition and their gains have been much more modest. I would say Poland has much more adopted the entrepreneurial, aspirational attitude than some of the other Eastern European countries, and perhaps even more than some of the Western European countries, which have some more decadent intellectual and cultural traditions that have come to the fore more recently.
So the next question, it's a natural consequence of your answer. Why are most rich countries are in decline today? Government spending is rising, growth is slowing, people want comfort and safety, but they don't want to have children. From the US and Europe to the Asian tigers, we see the same problems everywhere.
Yes, I think I agree with the last part of that we do see the same problems everywhere, in the more rich developed countries as well. And I think that is part of the human condition. We're always going to have problems. And so, the confronting problems is not the issue. And I think also when you have an open-ended culture and an open-ended world, particularly as we have in the modern world, as you solve some problems, new kinds of problems come into existence. So I think seeing that there are problems shouldn't be seen as a problem, to put it somewhat paradoxically. It's part of life. I don't think I agree with the first part of the question, though, that the rich developed countries are in decline. And partly I would notice an internal tension just in the question. To say that growth rates are declining, we're still growing. And growth is the opposite of decline. So it's one thing to say, we were growing at 8%, and now we're only growing at 3%. Now you might then say, well,
okay, so it's a decline in the derivative.
That's right. That's right.
Mathematically.
So that's right. It's a second order kind of issue there, and it might be an indication of a problem that trend will continue, that in 10 years the growth rate will be down to 0% and then it will be -3 and so on. But we don't know that yet. We are still growing. At the same time, I think we do need to look at other indicators. We are growing the economies, perhaps at a more modest rate, but then different economies are growing at different rates. So that's a big average that we're putting out there. Life expectancies, I think, are still increasing. It had a COVID effect, right, and so on. So it may just be that what we have are what we now call first world problems, right? This is to put it trivially. It used to be that when I went to the coffee shop, they brought my coffee in 1 minute. Now it's taking them 2 minutes to bring my mocha latte. Culture. Okay, that's to trivialize. But I think we, as social scientists and as philosophers, we do need to scale back and start looking at the long view. To say in the year 2025 that our growth rate is only 3%. Compare that to 100 years ago. Compare that to 200 years ago. This is still a tiny amount of human history. And we look at the vast, not a century or two or a decade or two, but millennia when the growth rate was 0. Right? When we might have a little bit better, a little bit worse, a little bit better, a little bit worse. That's been the long period of human history. I would also say, aside from various other indicators, we would say, well, look at aside from the more material or physical indicators. How much money is in my bank account? How are my stocks doing? Am I living longer? Are we continuing to cure diseases? All of those are, of course, important. But also on other issues. Suppose we say women should have equal rights. Are we making progress on that still? Do we think that slavery is bad? And are we continuing to make progress on that? Do we think that racial discrimination is a bad thing? And are we continuing to make progress on that? And we might say on all of these things, if I look at a 3-year graph, it seems like we're having more problems now. But if we look at a 20-year graph or a 50-year graph, I think it's a wavy line and upward on all of those dimensions. The other thing I would say, and this is perhaps the most important thing with respect to all of these things, and I think this is another thing that we can be thankful to the Greeks and the ancient Greeks for, is when we see problems, do we think we can solve the problem? Or do we have the attitude, problems is life, and most problems are unsolvable, and we just have to endure the consequences of the problems because we cannot fix ourselves, we cannot fix the world, we cannot make the better place. So my sense is that yes, we are attentive to hundreds and thousands of little problems that will emerge, and sometimes culturally we're progressing on a lot of them. Maybe sometimes we're not paying attention to these ones and we slip back on those, and sometimes because we're starting to do new things in a different way, we make a big mess in some area. But the most important thing is, when do we think that we can identify those problems as they emerge, and we have the mindset of trying to solve that problem, that we're going to be experimental. And that also, because we're not only psychologically rich, we have the scientists and the engineers and the attitude that we can fix these things, but we also have created a wealthy economy that we have the resources to try lots of experiments and put the engineers, for example, onto the project to try lots of different things to fix the problem. So I think problems and problem solving is built into the human condition. And the fact that we are alert to those problems, and the fact that we are upset by problems when they emerge and when we don't think we are making progress as quickly as we think we should be. Why do we still have so many racists in our society? I don't understand that. That's a sign of health. And that's a sign that we're probably then going to divert more resources to that and fix that problem over the next 10 years. So I'm a little more optimistic. Now, you did mention the demographics issue as part of it along there. I don't know if you want to speak to that particularly, or if that more general answer is good enough.
Okay, so the next question is the wealth a game changer in the behavior, individual and social, of human beings? Because if we are poor, when we are poor, we are highly motivated. I used to be a poor guy till my 30s. We lived in socialist Poland, which was in complete decline. And when we saw the Western Europe, we wanted became the same as they were. But nowadays we see in the Western Europe that the people are not motivated to discover, for the challenges. They want to have a peaceful life, not be responsible. Do you think that this trigger is the wealth?
Yeah, I think wealth is transformative. Yeah, absolutely. I think if we say culturally, then if you have a wealthy culture, then that does change how individuals growing up in that culture think about things. So one measure of this, again, this is short historical time, is to say just 200 years ago, average life expectancy was in the 30s, 35, and that's in the more successful countries in the world. And that for most of human history, the norm, life expectancy was in the 20s. Yeah. And I do think you think about life differently if you plan when you're a young person with the expectation, I'm probably going to live 35 years or so. So for example, just to put it very bluntly, if I am a teenager and I am rational about my life and I think I might only live to be 35, when should I start having children? Particularly if I'm a young woman, then I need to be starting to have children when I am a teenager, because I want to live long enough to raise my children to adulthood. And that means that by the time I am in my early 30s, I will be an old woman, or I might have died already. Chances are very good. But I want my daughters to now be old enough to be able to start having children themselves. And maybe I want to see my grandchildren a little bit before I die. To contrast that to just in 100 years or 200 years when you are a teenager now thinking about your life, and as young women do of the last several generations, I'm probably going to live 75, 80 years. So I also am aware that I am probably going to survive birth or giving birth, whereas giving birth has been the greatest killer of women throughout history. It's very rare now for young women to die in childbirth, and it's a tragedy when they do. So I don't have to start thinking about raising my children or having children when I am as young. So I can start to transfer. So the wealth really is transformative. And just also the issues about mortality. Wealth is transformative there. Better nutrition, better medical care, better hygiene, and so forth. Rather than having 40%, 50%, sometimes 60% of my children dying before age 5. How awful is that? How do you think about, you're a young woman, how many pregnancies do I have to plan for if I want to have 1, 2, 3, or 4 children survive to adulthood? Versus now I can start having children later, and I can have 1, 2, 3, whatever my ideal family size is, and I can be quite sure that they are all going to survive to adulthood. So I do think, yes, that's transformative. Being a wealthy society, I think, also is transformative educationally. We can think, okay, I have children. When do my children need to start working? And if I'm in a poor society, they need to start working very soon to start contributing to the family. As we become richer, every society that has started to become richer does exactly the same thing. They start investing in their children's education. And this is part of the modern world especially, I think we are progressive. The next generation should have a better life than I should. That's the normal, the new normal. And I want my children to have a better life, and education is the path to them having a better life. So they are all going to learn to read, to write, to do mathematics. And they're also going to start, when I raise my children, I'm going to tell them to think about their career opportunities differently. It's not just as in my family, the Hickses were farmers forever, as far as we know. You grow up, you will be a farmer. But, my great-grandfather, what's his career opportunities? It's not career opportunities. Who do I want to be when I grow up? You're going to be a farmer. He learns to be a farmer from a young age. He goes to grade 6. That's amazing education for the Canadian context. Next generation, no, you're going to go to grade 8. No, you are next generation going to go to high school and graduate. You're going to go to university and graduate. So the aspirations and how we think about that formative part of life. The idea, this is again, wealth as transformative, that I can retire. For all of human history, when do you stop working? You don't stop working. You work until you die. And in many cases in tribes, if you are no longer to be economically contributing to your tribe, you are expected to commit a kind of suicide, to go off into whatever and let the elements take it. To then think that my life, and this is the average life for now, 1 billion people around the world. I can be in school learning, having fun for the first 20 years of my life. I can work hard, say for 30 years until I am 50 and into my 50s. But then I can save up enough money to retire and do whatever I want, and I expect that I'm going to have another 25 years to do whatever I like. So yes, wealth is absolutely transformative on how human beings think about their lives. But then we come back to, as you're pointing out, at the same time, there does seem to be a large number of people who have kind of adopted the life of the lion in the zoo, and they are quite comfortable being the lion in the zoo. I don't need to work. Why should I work hard? Right? And partly I think this is because they have acquired certain attitudes about work, that work is something you have to do. It means going to work for the boss, and the boss tells you what to do. And I never really found something I was in love with when I was in school. So the idea that work can be a source of self-realization, entrepreneurial passion, is just entirely alien to those people. And I don't mind the fact, maybe my mom and dad gave me a comfortable life. I'm perfectly fine if the state takes over just giving me a comfortable life. I think that is a sign of bad education, bad parenting, and an increasingly dysfunctional political economy, to the extent that we have in some cultural subsectors taught generations of increasing people that there's always someone who's going to look after you, that you don't have to, that can be a kind of narcotic for a certain kind of person. So we do then say wealth brings transformative, positive possibilities, but it does bring narcotic possibilities as well. Some rich people throughout history have struggled with this issue. Right? I became rich, but I have my children, and I don't want them to just have everything handed to them. So good parenting, I think, has to pay attention to this. If you've got money, how nonetheless do you develop the psychology and the character set in your children so they don't just go through their whole lives, I can live off of mommy's money or daddy's money, that I need to grow up and become a full human being. That's a big challenge.
I think that the most important in life is not to have money, but to have ability to have money.
Yes.
Earn them.
That's right.
One second, I think we should skip some questions because we have just one day for that interview. And what's more important, after that interview, we will try to make some videos over there on Acropolis. So maybe we should skip to question number 19.
Okay, it's me.
Maybe me.
Okay, let's go.
Can we really answer the question about the meaning of life? And is it even worth trying?
That's like a classic philosophical question. Right? Sometimes that question is asked because philosophy has developed a certain kind of reputation. And I think it is a deserved reputation because many philosophies that have been developed and have had articulate reputation have said, well, philosophy is about all of these unanswerable questions. And so I've thought about these questions. I think I've become a skeptic. There is no answer to these questions. And so to the extent that that philosophy is seen as representing philosophy, then people will say, well, why bother even trying? I think it also is part of the challenge of philosophy that we are, when we do philosophy, thinking about the most fundamental questions of life. What is the world really? Do gods exist? Is there one God? Is there many God? Are those all just made up stories? What happens to me when I die? Is love real? Can I achieve my dreams? These are all very fundamental, deep questions. Am I in control of my life? Or am I at the mercy of forces out there beyond my control? And those are huge questions, and they require a lot of knowledge and a lot of deep thinking. So I think it's also a possibility for many people that I start to think about those questions. I think that's natural as human beings. You are going to think about those questions, but maybe they are too difficult for me. Or maybe I'm too busy doing other things and I think about them a little bit here and there, but I don't have time to do it systematically. So then I just think, well, I haven't been able to answer those questions in the amount of time, so maybe they are unanswerable. If I also am in an intellectual culture where lots of leading intellectuals are saying those are unanswerable questions, then philosophy is going to develop a reputation. And I think, unfortunately, because I'm not in that philosophical tradition at all, that has been the reputation of philosophy over the last century or so. Much of philosophy goes in cycles of optimism and pessimism, and the middle part of the 20th century especially, the one that Jan and I were born into. You were a little bit younger, you were in a different generation, but it was perhaps the most skeptical philosophical century ever, or philosophical era, because you had very sophisticated philosophies developed that reached the conclusion that philosophy's questions were unanswerable, even to the point where we say we should stop asking those questions at all. It's not only that they're unanswerable, those are really meaningless questions, and we should just self-dissolve the entire discipline of philosophy and go do something else. Now, I'm on the opposite side of that philosophical fence. I think these philosophy questions are fundamental, they're inescapable to the human condition. I think they are of vital importance for every human being to address as part of one's ongoing thinking about one's life. And I do think also that they are answerable questions. Not that the answers are easy or that they should be arrived at simplistically. And I think part of it is going to involve recognizing that all of them have controversy, and that part of one's education is to be aware that there are different philosophical perspectives and to engage with them to some extent. So I do think most people do this. They don't do it as systematically as professional intellectuals do, or particularly that lucky subset of people who get to spend their entire professional lives thinking about those questions, but these are still human questions. Probably the most significant questions that people are going to put themselves where philosophy meets the road are questions of religion. And we're all familiar with all of these questions. And I think the vast majority of people do think, is there really a God? Yes or no? And they do come to an answer to that question. And how they answer that question is a big component in their formulating their view of the meaning of life. I say yes, then a lot of other questions answers to lots of other questions fall into place about what the meaning of my life is. And I have a series of religious answers. Or I say no, I need to answer this question without reference to supernatural and lots of other questions. Now, there are lots of sub-variations that are worked out there, but everybody knows that question, everybody thinks about that question, and everybody comes up with an answer to that question, to my knowledge. Even the average unthinking person, I think, really has an answer to that question. Either they have made religion an operative part of their psychology, or they have not. If you adopt an agnostic position, you say, I don't know, right? Nonetheless, you are acting on answers to lots of other questions. You say, no, I need to get a job, I'm going to have a spouse, or I'm not going to have a spouse. And that's another deeply philosophical set of questions that people engage with. Right? Am I going to get married or not? And then I say, well, what's going to make me happy? Do I think happiness is realistic? And that's a big philosophical, and everybody answers that question. And then when we start meeting young people, I think young people spend huge amounts of time trying to think, what's real friendship? How can I really trust people? How do I want to be when I am with my friends? How do I want to be with people I think are my enemies? What policies am I going to enact? We talked earlier about being an entrepreneur or getting a job or becoming a thief or just being content to be the lion in the zoo with my social welfare check. Everybody, as teenagers, thinks about those issues. So I think people are a lot more philosophical than we tend to give them credit for.
So let me ask you another philosophical question. Do we have free will? How much control do we really have on our own choices? Let's say I own a company, I worked for it for years and finally, eventually became successful. Is it really thanks to me, my skills, or it is something written in my genes?
Yes. Well, my view on that philosophically is that yes, we do have free will, we do have volition. I tend to prefer the language of volition, that is to say we have a consciousness that has some self-regulatory capacities. So to take, for example, I can remember many years, I'll use a student example, sitting in lectures with professors who were terrible lectures. And it required effort on my behalf to stay paying attention. So we do have, depending on the stimulus that's available, depending on what's going on in our minds, a capacity. It's a self-regulatory capacity. I think of it sometimes as like a rheostat, to use an engineering example, to turn up the dial or to turn down the dial, to pay attention to what's going on, to focus on this, to focus on that. So introspectively, I think we're all aware of this as a capacity. Also, as a student, I can remember evenings when I was tired late at night, but I had an examination the next day, or I had an essay that I was to complete, and I was tired, and I could feel my physiological and psychological systems shutting down, and I can let that happen. I can go in the sleep direction, or I can, again, turn the rheostat up and say, no, I need to pay attention for 30 more minutes to get this done. So I think we do have this self-regulatory capacity. I think as long as we don't have brain damage, whatever parts of the brain that enable us to control this is a real phenomenon. And the extent to which we use that capacity is determinative of how active-minded we are. Some people let themselves drift through life psychologically. Those people will be much more determined. Right? They will be influenced and conditioned by forces outside, voices, environmental conditions, or whatever biological systems are speaking to them. I'm tired, sleep, I'm hungry, I eat, right? Instead of being active-mindedly regulating these systems as well. So I think we do have the capacity, but that people then are going to fall into different groups depending on how they exercise that capacity. We do know some people have a habit of being more active-minded, and other people are more passive-minded. Now then, further down the road, being active-minded doesn't guarantee that you are going to reach certain conclusions. We know that active-minded people will think about all sorts of things, and I will say the right answer is in this direction, and I will choose to go in this direction. Other people will say, I've been active-minded about this, and I choose to go in this direction. They will have very different life plans with different life outcomes. And so it's going to then be a mixture of. We do have bodies, and I think much of it is genetic. Whether it's 20, 30, 40%, I don't have a precise answer there. I think that's part of ongoing biology and psychobiology to figure that out. There are some things that are not going to be under my control, some things that are going to be under my control. At the same time, also, we are all born into certain social circumstances. And in some cases, those social circumstances are encouraging of certain things and discouraging of other things, depending on how liberal or authoritarian those social circumstances are. It may be almost impossible for me, no matter how active-minded I am, to overcome those social circumstances, particularly when I'm young, and so I will end up being more conditioned. But if I'm a more active-minded person, and I think if I'm in liberal circumstances, particularly prosperous liberal circumstances, then to that extent I am much more in control of my destiny, and the outcomes are going to be much more about me. Now then, to take the example particularly about your business career, again, that's going to be a very hard judgment course to make, and I think we need to have a lot more data. But we do have to say there's going to be a big difference between someone who has decided to become an entrepreneur or not. I suppose I'm a tech entrepreneur right now. If I decide, I don't want to do math, starting my own business sounds too hard, so I'm not going to go into tech. Well, I'm never going to become a tech billionaire. That's true. So one thing is I do have to say, I'm going to pay attention in math class and I'm going to learn math and I have to decide to become an entrepreneur. But then I also would have to say, move to the Boston Route 128 corridor. I have to move to Research Triangle in North Carolina, or I do have to move to Silicon Valley to go to be in the pool of other entrepreneurs. But then the standard data is to say, well, sure, maybe 1,000 people a year move to Silicon Valley, but only 1/10 of them become tech billionaires or whatever it is. And so it's still a matter of luck. I think that's to overlook the fact that the ones who did, they had to choose lots of things along the way in order to be in the right pool to have those opportunities available to them to be successful in the first place. But still, there's a lot to say. When we use the concept of luck, that's just to say, in life, some things are under our control and other things are not under our control. And the luck component is to say how other forces, including other people who have control, make their various decisions and their impact on you. The more active-minded you are, the more active you are, the less your life is a matter of luck. Right? So there are lots of cliches from the business world. They'll say, the harder I work, the luckier I get, right? Or the education version is the more I study, the luckier I get. Or in tennis, right, the tennis player will say, the number of times you hit the ball and it hits the top of the net and goes over. Well, the more accurate my shooting becomes, the luckier I get. But they're talking about those examples there.
Mm-hmm. Back to the topic of postmodernism. How do postmodernists attack the main parts of Western civilization?
Yeah.
You once said that Jordan Peterson chose this, and that's why they hate him.
Well, yes, Jordan Peterson certainly has been one of the front men, so to speak, in the culture wars against postmodernism because of his unspokenness and his integrity in following his principles. Right? They do sense that he's both articulate and not afraid to name names and to be a cultural warrior. So he's receiving more pushback, so to speak, than probably most people in the culture wars. So that's to explain, or just to speak to his position there as well. The first part of your question is to say when the postmoderns are attacking the fundamentals of modernity or the fundamentals of the Enlightenment project. In philosophical historic terms, we typically label the long 1700s. So if you think of Isaac Newton publishing Principia Mathematica at the end of the 1600s and how that revolutionized the sciences going into the 1700s. Or John Locke's philosophy being published at the end of the 1600s with religious toleration, separation of church and state, classically liberal philosophy, and how that transformed the world in the 1700s again. Industrial revolution of the 1700s. The great battles against slavery as a disgusting stain on humanity starting to happen in the 1700s. Women and men who like women in the 1700s again starting to say, well, maybe we should have more equal status for women. Women should get an education too. They should have the same fundamental rights. Again, the 1700s. Adam Smith, we have to mention, publishing The Wealth of Nations in 1776, the same year as the United States Declaration of Independence. So this Enlightenment era is institutionalizing the major ideas of modernity and transforming society. So we're doing religion differently, we're doing science differently, we have the Industrial Revolution, we're getting rid of slavery, women are becoming more equal, we're becoming more democratic and republican in our politics, all of the old feudal regimes are starting to decline and so forth. Now that's the modern world, and we're becoming wealthier and more optimistic, and we think of ourselves as progressive, that we are progressing. We're answering all of these questions, and we're making the world a better place, and that's normal. We should be able to do this. All of that is exactly what the postmoderns are attacking, right? So they will argue that equality and liberty are, they use the quotation marks a lot, right? Which is an indication of speaking ironically or dismissively, right? Or freedom, yeah, really, or progress, right? So that cynicism about progress and about genuine idealism, right? They don't agree with that. Now, on my analysis of this, they are attacking the philosophical fundamentals that underlie this. And I think that's right, because all of the most important postmoderns, the names we read these guys, we all hear about Michel Foucault, PhD in philosophy. We hear about Jean-Francois Lyotard. He's the one who gave us the name postmodernism in philosophy, and being skeptical about meta-narratives. Now that's a little bit of technical term of art, but a narrative is a story that we tell. And a meta-narrative is a big story that we tell. And that's what philosophy is about. We tell this big story about the meaning of life and human aspirations, and the modern world has told this big meta-narrative about liberty and freedom and equality and progress and so forth, and we are skeptical about that meta-narrative. So we don't believe that, right, anymore. Another philosophy PhD, Jacques Derrida, coming out of particularly linguistics and the study of grammar, and the phrase of deconstruction that is most associated with his school of thought. PhD in philosophy. The most famous American postmodernist, Richard Rorty, PhD in philosophy, and he's one of the ones I was alluding to earlier, who, as a result of doing lots and lots of philosophy, wants to say, all of these guys want to say, we've tried the modern world, we've tried the Enlightenment. Yes, we got rid of old-fashioned religion, but we've just replaced that with modern science and technology and capitalism. We've tried that, they're all failures. We're skeptical about everything. It's all gone. So we've tried all of this, and Richard Rorty's forthright conclusion was to say, yeah, we think it's all reached a dead end. The Enlightenment is a complete failure. And so he said, we have to dissolve philosophy as a discipline. And to his credit, he stopped being a philosophy professor. He said, okay, I'm just going to go and do literature. I'm going to become a professor of comparative literature.
Or a carpenter.
Or whatever it is, because philosophy is a pointless discipline. But there we're moving away from philosophy, which is supposed to be about truth and reality and getting real objective answers about the way the world works, to just narratives. But narratives in literature, it's a fictional space. We make stuff up. It's much more skeptical. Now, the deepest point that the postmodern philosophers are attacking, two I would emphasize here. One is about our cognitive orientation to the world. Do we think that human beings are cognitively competent? That I have sensory apparatus that puts me in contact with the world, that I can gather information about it, that I have a rational capacity to think about the world, to form abstract concepts, to do logical analyses, to figure out what's a better answer or a worse answer in more sophisticated form, to do scientific method, and to develop very sophisticated tools to tease out more sophisticated answers about reality. And I think that that's objective and possible, or am I skeptical about all of that? And the postmodern answer is to say no. Reason and human cognition is fundamentally incompetent. It's not about knowledge. It's not about truth. It's not about objectivity. We all just make up subjective stories, and you make up different subjective stories than I make up, and there's no objective court of appeal. And so all we have is this power struggle between your subjective stories and my subjective stories. So that's the deep cognitive attack on modern reason and modern science and its aspirations. The other is a point about human nature, I think, and values. That one of the things that's important in modernity and coming to flower in the Enlightenment is the idea of the individual. That the individual is important. It might be in religious context, your individual soul. or more secular, your individual consciousness, your individual life, your life as an individual. Partly it's a political point. It's yours. It's not subject to the king. It's not subject to the Lord. You are not a subject. You are a free agent, and politically you should be a citizen to the extent that we are going to do things politically. And that's a fundamental shift that occurs in early modernity. In religion, we see that you should, and this is partly of the big controversy between the Protestants and the Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, but other religions as well, that religion is not a matter of just doing what you're told to do and going through the rites and engaging in certain social practices. Religion is about you thinking deeply and reflecting on important things and deciding in your own conscience whether you think God is real or not, and whether it's this God or that God, and committing to that God. And that individual agency is fundamental to genuine religion. And there are going to be certain social consequences of that. I have to expect that sometimes individuals are going to make different choices, and I'm going to have to put up with that or tolerate that. But also that this has to be something I do as an individual freely. It can't be coerced by the state, so we need to separate religion. So, but that individualism then becomes absolutely important in religion. It becomes absolutely important in politics. And you know what? Slaves are human beings too. And they're individuals with their own souls or their own conscience or their own identity. So I should respect their individual. Women also are individuals. And that's why I have to respect that women should make their own choices about what their lives are going to be and so forth. To the extent that we think also that people as individuals have this agency, that they can control their lives, then we think that they can run their own lives economically. That I should not be just assigned a job, that I should be free to go and make my own choices in life. And so we start to say I should then be able to choose my own career, to do business with these people over here or not do business with those people over there as I choose. And so we see the beginnings of a development of a free market economy. And it's the individuals who are free. So religiously, intellectually, socially, politically, this individualism absolutely fundamental to so much of the modern project. And that's why I think also for postmodernism, the fact that they are rejecting individualism all the way through is absolutely spot on from their postmodern perspective. Because what they want to argue is we don't believe in the individual. We dissolve the individual. We reject the subject. You are not an individual, you're part of a group. And so the phrase that we use, this identity politics, what is your identity? Well, it's not you as a sovereign individual with your own agency. For them, your identity is a constellation of various group identities. I'm not Stephen Hicks, right, who happens to be a male, who might happen to be Canadian American ethnically, who happens to be a certain religion or whatever. The happens to be part gets transformed. I am first and foremost a white guy. I am a male, right? And so I am a carrier of this group identity, maleness, whiteness, right? A certain religious identity, a certain ethnic identity. Plus the assumption then that all of these different groups are in these antagonistic power relationships with each other as also part of the postmodern. So it's me as a part of this group against you as a part of these various other groups and those people with these various other groups. And none of us objectively has the capacity to talk about facts and reason. It is just these subjectively group constellations of identities in this power struggle. So, and that is fundamentally different and opposed to the modern project. So, yeah.
Okay, so it's a very sophisticated question.
Well, that's what we're here for.
Yeah, our viewers value economic freedom, entrepreneurship, independence, and civil liberty.
Good for them.
Which philosophical schools and thinkers would you recommend to people like that?
Yes. Well, since we are in Greece, looking at the Acropolis, I would have to say of all of the Greek schools, one of the things that was so impressive about the Greek accomplishment is that all of the major schools of philosophy, even ones that we recognize as competing schools of philosophy 2.5 millennia later, were originated and developed to degrees of sophistication by the Greeks. So you had skeptics, you had more religious-friendly philosophies, more science-friendly philosophies, some that are focused more on moral issues, political issues, human agency issues, and so on. So my big picture, long historical view would then be to say the Aristotelian school is the one that is going to be most friendly to people who are modern, more entrepreneurial in their outlook, more optimistic, more science, technology, engineering friendly in their orientation. Now, that's not to say there's not value to be found in elements from some of the other schools. So for example, often one juxtaposes Platonism with Aristotelianism. Aristotle being a much more naturalistic, science-friendly philosophy, Plato being a more otherworldly, religion-friendly philosophy, shall we say. But nonetheless, there are, I think, are elements of Platonism that are amenable. One of the things that the Platonists emphasized more than the Aristotelianism was mathematics, and the importance of mathematics to the modern project and part of the world that we are living in, I think is can't be overstated. So the Aristotelians tended not to develop math as much, so I would import that from the Platonists as well. I think it's also important to point out that Stoicism, as an ancient philosophy, the earliest Stoic philosophers, again, were Greek. To their great credit, has had great longevity and important resonance with many people, particularly people who are in positions of leadership, where they're dealing with making enormous decisions and stressful decisions, and with all of the emotional difficulty that goes along with that. While I'm not a Stoic, I do recognize that part of the Stoic project about emotional self-training and self-regulation, that they did the best at going down that road. So I would give some props to Stoicism as well. More recently, in the early modern world, lots of philosophers I like. I do like Francis Bacon as inaugurating a naturalistic, science and technology-friendly philosophy. John Locke, some of his cognitive philosophy, more importantly, his views on religious toleration, separation of church and state, classically liberal politics, so forth. Friedrich Nietzsche, but in a nuanced sense, only his negative stuff. Almost everything positively Friedrich Nietzsche said I disagree with, but he is one of the great critics of all of the other schools of philosophy of all time. And so I think one can learn a huge amount from reading Nietzsche's criticisms of various other philosophical schools. And in a more inchoate sense, he's also a great romantic thinker in some sense. So he's very aspirational. Moving into the 20th century, I like a significant amount, not all, but of Karl Popper's work, and a significant amount, I would say more of Ayn Rand's work, from both of them from the middle part of the 20th century. Karl Popper was one of the ones fighting the rising tide of skepticism that was soon to lead into postmodernism. I think he was fighting a losing battle, but he was fighting the good fight, and parts of his epistemology, I think, are still valuable. The notion of falsifiability, being willing to think outside the box, as we put it colloquially, but also to challenge your ideas, and that are part of cognitive health and moral health as a thinking human being, particularly as a scientist, to be willing to have one's ideas challenged and to be falsified, and to change one's mind is a fundamental cognitive virtue. On the positive side, I think working with that, Rand has some very promising things she did in epistemology, and I see her as carrying on the more naturalistic ethics tradition going all the way back to Aristotle, and then in politics much more classically liberal, so carrying on that Lockean tradition. So that would be the things that first come to mind in answer to that big question.
And what about Christianity? Because should we treat Christianity as a pure religion or also as an ideology?
Yeah. Well, I don't think there is, I'll put it bluntly, I don't think there is anything, such thing as Christianity. Right? I think we have to speak about Christianities.
Okay.
Right. So I think I'm not a Christian, but I think if I look at Christians, and I think there's lots of Christians who are sincere in their beliefs, but I think they believe all sorts of very different things. And I don't think they believe the same things. Just to take one example, there are people who I think are real Christians, who think that being a real Christian most fundamentally means following Ecclesiastes, and that means the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And so that is to say, for them, fundamentally, it's about fear. That's the most important thing. You are a sinful person. God is almighty. God is judging you, and you should be afraid. For many other Christians, that is not the right fundamental for Christianity. God is love. God is the Father who created, who provides for us.
Source of 10 Commandments.
And so he might sometimes be a little bit stern, but the emphasis should be fundamentally on love. Now, I think both of those are Christianities, and they are very different Christianities. I think there are Christians who, for whom, let me put in a slightly humorous joke. There's a joke about there being three different kinds of Christians. There are Christians for whom Christmas is the most important holiday, Christians for whom Good Friday is the most important holiday, and Christians for whom Easter Sunday or Easter Monday, depending on how you count the calendar, is the most important thing. And I think all of those are legitimate forms of Christianity, and I see lots of people for whom. So what is the Christmas Christian, as I think of them? And this is most of the people, I would say, in my family, but maybe actually I have to say about half of them in my family. What does it mean? Well, at Christmas, you celebrate the birth of Jesus. It's about the beginning of life and the birth of life and all of the promise of life that is ahead for you. But also, what do we do with Christmas? We celebrate the accomplishments of the year. We exchange presents. We get together with the people we love, and life is good, and it's about celebrating life and the beginning of life and so on. And I think fundamentally that is a religion, and it's giving answers to all of the important, meaningful lives. And of course, it has more specific doctrinal points that are attached to that. But Good Friday Christians, well, what's the important thing that happened on Good Friday? It's the crucifixion. Jesus died, and he died horribly. He died a martyr, and he died for us because we are sinful beings. Collectively, we have done all of these horrible things, and absent Jesus' sacrifice, we will continue to do all of these horrible things. And if we think fundamentally about the human condition, it is sin, it is guilt, and this desperate need for someone to save us from the consequences of our sin and guilt. And that's a much darker place. And the fact that someone died for us, this horrible, agonizing death, so that we could be saved. And I think for many Christians, that's deep. But the psychology of that approach to Christianity is very different from life is good, fellowship, get together with family, exchange gifts, life, and so forth. Very different. And then for Easter Sunday or Easter Monday, the important thing here is he died, and then he was resurrected. And this also speaks to a fundamental issue in the human condition. Death. How do I think about death? If I love life, death sounds horrible. And maybe my life has not been as successful as I would like it to have been. And I think when I die, it's all going to be over. And that is so sad. That is so depressing. But if there is a possible life after death, It's possible that my soul will separate from this corrupt body with all of its disappointments in the material world, and it will go to another world that is beautiful and wonderful, and everything is good. And I have a chance for that. And that is fundamentally what my religion is all about, hopeful for an eternal life beyond this world. And I think for many Christians, that is the heart and soul of their religion, the hope for eternal life. That's not fellowship and enjoying the life here and now. That's not being overwhelmed with a sense of guilt. That's a very different place. And I think those Christianities go off in very different directions. Now that is a huge question that you're putting out there, and I'm just teasing out a couple of answers to it. So I will put it back to you, how we would fine-tune that question more properly, because I think it's too big as originally stated.
So maybe next time.
Yeah.
Of course, we have much more questions for you.
Of course.
So maybe we should record another video next time, maybe online. But today we have to end. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellent
Thank you.
questions. Enjoyed it very much.
This great, splendid lecture.
Thank you.